The former Seven producer Taylor Orbach's claims have raised ethical concerns around how major news and current affairs programs secure exclusive, high-profile interviews. Joining us now is media ethics specialist and former journalist Dr. Dennis Muller from the University of Melbourne. Good morning, good to have you along.
Thanks, Dan.
Well, for starters, I wonder, with your ethics perspective and ethics lens, if you can give us a sense of what your observations are of what we've heard over the last couple of days.
Well, as a matter, it's a general point, I think. This is an example of checkbook journalism, and there are many problems with checkbook journalism. We accept that Channel 7 have made certain denials about what we heard yesterday in court, but generally speaking, checkbook journalism brings with it a lot of problems. The first one is a problem of why. Why has someone asked for information which is important enough to be in the public domain? Why has a media organisation decided to spend money buying it? That's the first question, motive. The second is transparency. Very often in these cases, deals are done as part of the transaction where agreements are made not to ask certain questions or to put a certain spin on the story. And so the story as presented is not a story which might have been presented had there not been money involved. And then you've got a problem about transparency to the audience. Do people get told? Typically they don't. Audiences see this stuff and think that it's the result of an ordinary standard journalistic interview, whereas actually behind the scenes there has been deals done, agreements made, and money's changed hands. So they're actually not seeing what they think they see. So finally, I think in all of this, you've got questions of editorial control. There have been many cases. In fact, a well-known publicity agent called Harry M. Miller was famous for saying that when he did these deals on behalf of interviewees and media, he actually had control of the story. So the question is the journalist or the media outlet in charge of the story, or is the informant in charge of the story?
Yeah, and in those instances, that's incredibly troubling. I wonder, Dennis, are there any instances where you think that there can be a need or a justification for types or forms of checkbook journalism?
I think they're very rare, Dan. There was a case as far back as 1975 that I know about where the Age actually paid money to a man called Tirith Kemlani. Now, he was the person, he was the go-between between the Whitlam government and a person who was going to supply billions of dollars for infrastructure in Australia. And this was a great political scandal at the time. In fact, it brought down the Whitlam government in the end. That was a case where the Age judged that the public interest justified the payment to Kemlani for certain documents. Now, that's a rare case. And there would be organisations that would think that even that was not justified. So in some organisations, there's a complete ban on checkbook journalism because of all the problems I've mentioned.
Yeah, and there is an important point, I think, that you make here about disclosure so that the audience understands exactly what the parameters are that led to whatever the broadcast or whatever material it is that they're seeing, because there is generally an assumption, isn't there, that journalists will do their work and hold a level of accountability and rigour of whoever is sitting before them.
Yes, I think that's absolutely right. And I think when this sort of thing happens, then almost the worst result is that people think, well, journalism's a tawdry business. Why would you trust anything that they say? And so it lowers people's trust in the institution of the media at a time when really our democracy can't afford any further diminution of trust in our institutions.
Well, and you take me exactly where I wanted to go, which is around this conversation around trust, because we are seeing trust in institutions, including across the media, at all-time lows. The rise of social media that is largely, or in some areas, completely unregulated and without any checks and balances. So what sort of impact does diminishing trust in journalism and the media more broadly have on storytelling and, as you point out, on democracy as well?
Well, we live in this period when social media and professional mass media, television, radio, newspapers, are all occupying the same space. They all interact with one another. It's a kind of a reciprocating machinery. And if people lose faith in the professional mass media, then they don't know where to go for the truth, because our first job as journalists is to tell the truth. And there's so much mistruth, misinformation around the place that people are confused about where to go. And if we don't hold to good standards of truth telling and transparency, then I think our democracy really is in even more trouble than it otherwise would be.
And I wonder if you've got a sense of what is the solution here. Is it more rigour and teeth perhaps for the Press Council, or is there a new body that is required that does investigate journalism and journalists to ensure the highest levels of integrity and disclosure?
Well, I think we do need one unified, effective media accountability organisation, which we don't have. Excuse me. We don't have at the moment, and that at the very least, what we should be doing is to include in our codes of ethics references. I'm sorry, Dan.
That's all right. While you're grabbing water, I just wanted to make the point to you, because there you're touching on the kind of rigour. I wonder, what do you see as the problems or the challenges with the Press Council, and what needs to be done to bolster it?
Well, the problem is that the Press Council's principles don't touch on this sort of thing. The Press Council is basically financed and owned by the newspaper companies and is not genuinely independent, though it tries its level best. But there is no mention of checkbook journalism in the codes of ethics of the Press Council or of the broadcast industry. And it's not mentioned specifically in the journalistic code of ethics either. And I think a good starting point would be to include reference to checkbook journalism and the risks involved. I don't think in the end you can probably stop it happening, but you can at least draw people's attention to the risks and the ethical problems involved.
Yeah, just finally, what is your message to media organisations and to journalists, and in fact the authority, about what should happen now and what needs to happen?
What needs to happen is disclosure at the very least. If you feel you must pay, then the very least you owe your audience is a transparent account of the circumstances in which the interview was obtained.
Dr. Dennis Muller, thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thanks so much, Dan.